May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Last week, I said that David doesn't know how to do retirement well. I made some jokes about his midlife crisis and how he was having trouble finding things to keep himself busy. I also reminded everyone of the saying that idle hands are the devil's playthings. And we see this week just how far this man after God's own heart has fallen. King David really has gotten involved with evil. This is one of those times that we've heard the story before. And we've heard it so many times that we don't always pay attention to the details. We can miss important parts because we're so confident that we already know what the story is about. For most of us, I only need to say the names David and Bathsheba, and we already have an idea in our minds about who did what wrong. And the tradition in the church has often been wrongly that Bathsheba seduced David and led him into sin. When we hear that history is written by the victors, it applies very well in this case. Our world has been dominated by men who don't always behave ethically, morally, responsibly, or even safely, and men who have a vested interest in staying in power even when they abuse that power. David was a man in power who abused his power. When we in the church or anywhere else look to blame Bathsheba for what she did to David simply by existing, we allow the men in power to not only abuse their power, but excuse their abuses of power and continue to do so at the expense of others, often women. Our world hasn't stopped these excuses. Neither have men in power stopped blaming others for their failings in desperate attempts to hold on to their power. I cannot say with any certainty how willing or unwilling Bathsheba was in this affair. What I can say with absolute certainty is that there was an enormous power imbalance between King David and the wife of one of his soldiers who literally lived and died by the king's command. What we have yet to grasp as a society is that a massive power imbalance like this one makes consent problematic at best and impossible at worst. When I was much younger, I learned a little about power dynamics. President Clinton was in office as President of the United States, and he was in the news every day. And so was Monica Lewinsky. As a teenager, I learned a lot, not all of it helpful, but the words of one of my friends in those days stuck with me. He said, "You want to hear the best pickup line in the world? Hi, I'm the President of the United States." In his telling, that level of power was simply irresistible. But this was before the Me Too movement and similar movements beforehand. Our world has operated on the false premise for a long time that people in power or with power are irresistible, compelling, attractive, but also that they have carte blanche to do anything they want, with anyone, to anyone, whenever they want, with no or almost no consequences. So when we look at David in today's reading, we can see that he has fully embraced his role as a traditional man with power. He does what he wants when he wants. He answers to no one. He sleeps late into the afternoon, has servants to do his bidding for him. You'll notice how little he actually does himself in this passage. He stays away from battle and lets others suffer on his behalf. He also treats people as objects for his pleasure and easily casts away the life of his underling as though it were nothing, simply because it was a problem for him. And he does all of this openly. He thinks he is above the law. He fears neither God nor man. He tells his servants to get Bathsheba for him so he can enjoy her. He sends for her husband from battle and plainly tries to get him intoxicated when he refuses to provide an alibi for his indiscretion. People talk. Servants whisper among themselves. Bathsheba had neighbors. People would have known about all of this. And David didn't care. He was completely shameless, unembarrassed. It's even possible that Uriah knew exactly what was going on the whole time. And as I've said, we still live with this understanding of power. Look at the celebrities who cheat on their spouses and lie about it or cover it up. Look at the presidents of the United States who have done similarly, and just as unashamed about it, as though their power or position in the world gives them the right to use and abuse people, to live outside the law. So where is my good news today? What is uplifting in today's message? The good news comes in the comparison of the two kings. Jesus is the opposite of the shameful King David. David lived in luxury while Jesus traveled around the countryside relying on the hospitality of others, eating barley loaves, the food of the common person. King David relied on others to do his dirty work for him, while King Jesus took it upon himself to distribute the bread to the 5,000. King David relaxes in his palace, sleeping on his couch until late in the afternoon. Jesus doesn't get a moment's peace, then has to retreat to the mountain to be on his own, having to walk on water to catch up with his disciples, who have left in their boat without him to catch some rest for themselves. King David takes full advantage of his position of power to satisfy his own desires, while King Jesus, though being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped, but instead lived as a mere human man. The people tried to make Jesus their king by force. Jesus resisted becoming a king like David and evaded them. David treated people as things, as objects for his own pleasure. And though it goes beyond this gospel passage, Jesus allowed others to take of him for their healing and restoration. David put others at risk for his benefit, sending out soldiers to fight and die on his behalf. Hurting others himself, Jesus gave up his own life so that others might be saved, though he himself gained nothing. This is our true King. This is our God. Jesus shows us God's heart and exposes our corrupt longings for power, as we too often so longingly anticipate our own opportunities for power and the wantonness that goes along with it, that we continue to excuse the behavior of others who abuse their power, even at the expense of people and the planet. But the Lord is our refuge. Jesus is the King we need. And Jesus, though we don't deserve it, still reaches out to us, offering us himself, the bread of life. Amen.